The target vocabulary for this section are the verbs deliberate, deviate, embellish, lure, and mar. Here are 5 more verbs for you to learn and master. Let's dive in to word number 1. Word number 1 is deliberate, which means to think very carefully about something. For example, John is deliberating whether to accept the job offer or not. To deliberate is to think deeply about something, to think very, very carefully. So it's a deeper form of thinking. In this example, John has been offered a new job, and he is thinking very carefully about whether or not to accept it. He is deliberating. When a judge listens to evidence in a courtroom, he listens to both sides and he goes away and thinks very carefully about whether to sentence the person or not. The judge thinks very, very carefully. He deliberates. So he deliberates over whether to sentence the person or to let them go free. So this is deliberate, to think very, very carefully. Now here is word number 2. Word number 2 is deviate, which means to do something in a different way from what is normal. For example, the aircraft suddenly deviated from its flight path and landed at the nearest airport. To deviate is to do something in a different way from what is normal. So the aeroplane was traveling on its normal flight path, but suddenly it deviated. It went a different way. So it's doing something in a different way from what is normal. If I'm climbing a mountain and the mountain has a mountain path that all the climbers should follow, the mountain guide might say to me, "Do not deviate from the path, otherwise you may get injured." So he's saying to me, just follow the path as normal. Don't deviate from it. So this is the meaning of deviate. Now let's look at the next word. Word number 3 is embellish, which means to make something more beautiful or interesting by adding things to it. For example, he always embellishes his stories to make them sound more exciting than they really are. When we embellish something, we add things to it to make it more interesting, more exciting, or more beautiful. In this example, the man embellishes his stories. He adds things to the stories to make them sound more exciting. Perhaps the things he adds are untrue. So often when we say he embellishes his stories, it means he adds details which are perhaps not true. Another example of embellish would be to embellish a cake. Imagine I make a cake, but it looks quite plain. It's just white, not very exciting. I can embellish the cake by adding strawberries on top, some chocolate sauce, and other decorations. So I embellished the cake. I made it look more beautiful and more interesting than normal. Now let's move on to word number 4. Word number 4 is lure, which means to attract someone by offering something exciting. For example, Jane was lured from the countryside to the city with the promise of a massively increased salary. Jane was attracted away from the countryside into the city. She was lured by the promise of an increased salary. So her boss said to her, "Come on, come to the office in the city. I will give you more money." And she was attracted by this. She went to the city. Now, lure sometimes has a negative feel to it. Sometimes when we are lured into something a bit negative. For example, a teenager who is attracted to smoking. Maybe the teenager looks at other children smoking and thinks they look cool, or the teenager looks at adults and thinks, wow, I want to be like them. So the teenager is lured into smoking. This means he is attracted into something bad. So often it has a negative feel to it. Not always, but very often. Now let's look at word number 5. Word number 5 is mar, which means to spoil or damage something. For example, the wedding ceremony was marred by 2 members of the family arguing the whole time. A wedding is usually a happy and pleasant occasion, but this one was marred. It was spoiled because 2 members of the family were arguing the whole time. So when we use the word mar, we use it to say something happy, something pleasant, or something nice has been spoiled a little bit. It's been ruined somewhat. Another example would be, imagine if I go for a holiday to the Caribbean. I can say everything was fantastic. The food, the people, the beaches, everything was wonderful. But it was marred by bad weather. This means the bad weather spoiled it a little bit. Everything was great, but it was spoiled a little bit by bad weather. So bad weather marred my holiday. So those are the 5 words. Now move on to the pronunciation training. Don't forget to download the MP3s as well. Listen as much as you can. See you in the next lecture.